The story of Peter's vision begins in Acts chapter 10, verse 1, when God spoke to a devout Roman centurion named Cornelius, living in Caesarea, to send messengers to Joppa, about 35 miles south, to contact a man named Simon Peter. When the Gentile messengers arrived in Joppa at noon the next day, God sent Peter a very strange message. Acts chapter 10, verse 10 says, "And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance, and saw the heavens opened, and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air." At this point, God tells Peter something completely unexpected. Acts chapter 10, verse 13 says, "And there came a voice to him, 'Rise, Peter, kill and eat.' But Peter said, 'By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean.' And the voice came to him again a second time, 'What God has made clean, do not call common.'" If you only read this much of the story, you could easily come to the wrong conclusion. It is important to read the entire story to understand the correct biblical interpretation of the vision. Notice that although this story took place about a decade after the resurrection, Peter was still observing the Mosaic dietary laws without any notion that the Torah had been abolished. The fact that Peter was puzzled about this vision is clear evidence that something else was going on. The Romans had ruthlessly oppressed and persecuted the Jews for decades, and the Jews, in turn, fiercely hated all Gentiles and looked down on them with utter contempt. They were also certain that no Gentile would ever inherit eternal life in God's kingdom. In their eyes, the Gentiles were little more than subhuman beasts. Since Gentiles did not usually obey the law of Moses, the Jews assumed that all Gentiles were ritually unclean all the time. As a result, they created a rule that no Jewish man should associate with a Gentile to avoid becoming ritually defiled. This rule was not part of the Mosaic law. It was a tradition that the Jews added on their own. God used this vision to show Peter his racial prejudice, which would hinder the preaching of the gospel throughout the world. Acts chapter 10, verse 28 says, "And he said to them, 'You yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean.'" In this passage, the term common comes from the Greek word koinos, which refers to a clean item that becomes ritually defiled by touching something unclean. This is the same word that appears in Acts chapter 10, verse 13. Peter realized that the vision was symbolic, so the command to eat unclean animals was not to be taken literally. He now understood that God wanted everyone to hear the gospel, not just the Israelites. We know that this is the correct interpretation because God still considered animals to be unclean long after Peter's vision. In Revelation chapter 18, verse 2, John saw an angelic messenger. "And he called out with a mighty voice, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast.'" Clearly, God doesn't believe that the Torah has been abolished, and neither should we.